Okay, we're in the middle of Second Samuel. We just talked about how Nathan had named Solomon Jedediah for the Lord's sake, it says, and that means beloved of the Lord. And so as we go through here, we're moving into the middle of David's reign, and Second Samuel is basically his biography. And when we get the next few chapters are some things that are leading up to a big conflict in the family, even according to the prophecy that Nathan gave David, that there would always be a sword in your family, that there was part of the curse of his sin that seemed to just follow. That was part of the consequences, let's say, of his sin that seemed to follow. And so in the next couple of verses, there's this building up, and we're getting the character of Absalom is coming into view here. And Absalom has a sister named Tamar. Absalom's brother Amnon rapes Tamar, and Absalom is gonna get vengeance, but he waits for 2 years until he has an opportunity to kill Amnon. He does that. His servants do it according to his word, his command, and then we see that Absalom flees from the area, gets away from David, and they're apart for about 3 years. And so finally Absalom comes back, is invited by David back into the area, into family relationship to some degree again, and but Absalom begins to devise a method, a conspiracy to take over Israel and to be king himself. And so we come up to chapter 15 of 2 Samuel, and we're at that point, and it says, verse 1, "Now it came about after this that Absalom provided for himself a chariot and horses and 50 men as runners before him. And Absalom used to rise early and stand beside the way to the gate. And it happened that when any man had a suit to come to the king for judgment, Absalom would call to him and say, 'From what city are you?' And he would say, 'Your servant is from one of the tribes of Israel.' Then Absalom would say to him, 'See, your claims are good and right, but no man listens to you on the part of the king.' Moreover, Absalom would say, 'Oh, that one would appoint me judge in the land. Then every man who has any suit or cause could come to me, and I would give him justice.'" So we see Absalom setting up a little go to the king counseling center where he's talking to people, and he's undermining the king's authority, just subtly by saying, "Oh, I would take care of you. I would do so much more for you. You have a really just cause." And you can see this kind of thing. And of course, he's winning the hearts of the people. The people like to hear that. They like to hear, "Oh, someone cares for me. There's someone that really cares," not like the king. And so Absalom is working his way into the people's hearts. And he finally, full out, begins to arise in rebellion. And in verse 13 it says, "Then a messenger came to David saying, 'The hearts of the men of Israel are with Absalom.' And David said to all his servants who were with him at Jerusalem, 'Arise and let us flee, for otherwise none of us shall escape from Absalom. Go in haste, lest he overtake us quickly and bring down calamity on us and strike the city with the edge of the sword.'" So David is actually here fleeing from Jerusalem himself with some people that are loyal to him. And you see that at this point there's like a beginning of a separation of who's going to follow David, who's going to follow Absalom, what camp are you getting in. And Ahithophel, who is known as a very wise counselor, joins with Absalom. And this is a kind of a scary alliance as far as David's concerned, because Ahithophel really does have a lot of really good wisdom. But what happens in the meantime is that Hushai, like I said earlier, I don't take any credit for saying any names correctly. I'm just going to say them however, and I'm not saying that that's the way you're supposed to say it. Hushai the Archite is David's friend. In fact, it's really interesting if you're looking in First Chronicles when it lists all of the servants of David and all the the mighty men. This guy's over 1,000. This guy's over whatever, and then it says in Hushai the Archite, and says David's friend. So I kind of like that position. I'd like to be in the position where I'm just the friend. You're on staff as the friend, and so Hushai the Archite. There's this thing. Ahithophel staying with Absalom. Hushai wants to come to David, but David, is trying to instruct him. You'd do better for me if you were on the other side. Somebody kind of infiltrate the enemy's camp. Well, in chapter 17 and verse 14, it says, "And Absalom and all the men of Israel said, the council." Well, here I need to come up to that. Ahithophel gives some counsel as to what to do regarding David leaving and his men fleeing. He says, you need to go after them right now. They're tired, overtake them, take them down, and everybody will, and he says all these things. And Hushai comes along and says, oh, no, David is he's like a bear robbed of its cubs, and he'll be a force to be reckoned with. He'll hide in a cave, and then, you'll come and some of your men will be slaughtered, and then it'll be heard that Absalom's army has gone down. And so Hushai just undermines Ahithophel's counsel completely, because he stayed behind as a subversive, kind of undercover kind of agent in the camp. And actually, Absalom was questioning, when Hushai was there, and he was still in the camp, and Absalom said to Hushai, is this your loyalty to your friend? Why did you not go to your friend with your friend? That's in chapter 16, verse 17. Then Hushai said to Absalom, no, for whom the Lord, this people, and all the men of Israel have chosen, his will I be, and with him I will remain. So Hushai comes along and presents this thing like, I'm just faithful to whoever's in office. And you're the one in office right now, and I'm with you. So, but there was a prayer that was offered in the midst of this. David knew he was in trouble, and so David's, he prays in chapter 15. I know I'm bouncing around a little bit here, but he prays in chapter 15, verse 31, "O Lord, I pray, make the counsel of Ahithophel foolishness." And then just after that, he sees Hushai the Archite coming, and that's when he tells him, hey, you do better to return to the city, say you're going to be Absalom's servant, and subvert things from inside. And that's exactly what Hushai does, because Hushai really is David's friend. Absalom was questioning him at that point when he came to him and he was going to show allegiance to him. He says, is that what you do for your friend? Everyone knew Hushai was David's friend. So in verse 14 of chapter 17, where I was starting, then Absalom and all the men of Israel said, the counsel of Hushai the Archite is better than the counsel of Ahithophel. For the Lord had ordained to thwart the good counsel of Ahithophel in order that the Lord might bring calamity on Absalom. Here we see the power of answered prayer. David was in big trouble. He was about to be overtaken. He was, the hearts of the people had gone, for the majority of the people, it looks like, had gone to Absalom. And then Hushai comes after David prays and says, Lord, make Ahithophel's counsel look like foolishness. And sure enough, somehow the counsel of Ahithophel is rejected and Hushai's is accepted. And it said, Ahithophel, in verse 23 of chapter 17, says, now when Ahithophel saw that his counsel was not followed, he saddled his donkey and arose and went to his home, to his city, set his house in order, and strangled himself. Thus he died and was buried in the grave of his father. You see that it was so overwhelming. This guy really knew he had the best counsel, and when it was rejected, he couldn't take it. See, there was a lot of emotional problems back in these days too. We're not the only ones that suffer from those kind of things. And so he strangled himself, and that was probably extra good for David, because then Ahithophel wasn't even there to counsel Absalom anymore. So we go on, and there's a full-out war because Hushai follows Absalom's counsel Absalom follows Hushai's counsel instead of Ahithophel's. And so there's this battle that ensues. And as the battle's going on, Absalom is out, because that's what Hushai said. You need to go out with your troops in this battle. So Absalom does go out with his troops in the battle. And we see that in verse 9 of chapter 18, it says, now Absalom happened to meet the servants of David, for Absalom was riding on his mule, and the mule went under the thick branches of a great oak, and his head was caught fast in the oak. So he was left hanging between heaven and earth, while the mule that was under him kept going. So Absalom's riding along, and his mule gets head caught in like a fork in the branches, I guess, and he's just hanging up there. And so in verse 10, it says, when a certain man saw it, he told Joab and said, behold, I saw Absalom hanging in an oak. Joab's like, why didn't you strike him to the ground? And I would have given you 10 pieces of silver and a belt. And so we go on, and in verse 14 it says, then Joab said, I will not waste time here with you. So he took 3 spears in his hand and thrust them through the heart of Absalom while he was yet alive in the midst of the oak. So Absalom's attempt at overthrowing the government here is ended here because of the counsel of Hushai, because God answered David's prayer. and Absalom's hanging in the tree, and David's faithful military leader comes and kills him against David's command. David said, "Do not harm the young man," but he kills him anyway. So that's where we end at this point.